Now, back to the Frontier Freedom Hour with Jeff Hunt, sponsored by Centennial Institute at Colorado Christian University. Here's Jeff Hunt.
Friends, we're talking with Professor Tim Milosch of Biola University's adjunct faculty in Biola's Political Science Department. Got his PhD at the Claremont Graduate University, Political Science and Government. He writes a lot on what's happening in Israel. One of the lines that he had that I thought really stuck out well: this is more than terrorism, contrary to some Western opinion that sees the attack of Hamas on Israelis as mere mass terrorism. This latest attack is not just Hamas seeking to sow chaos and disrupt regional diplomacy. That's Iran's goal. For Hamas, this is about legitimizing its leadership of the Palestinian cause in blood and laying claim to the mantle of leading resistance against Israel with the ultimate object of destroying the nation of Israel. Hamas means war. Israel understands this and is preparing to respond in kind. Professor Milosch, please unpack that a little bit for us.
Yeah. Well, it kind of goes back to something we were talking about just before the break about, different people are going to have different values, different political cultures, emphasize different things. And this often gets missed when looking at the broader Arab-Israeli conflict, the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. There's a tendency to think that the Arab world is just one monolithic Islamic bloc, one monolithic Islamic culture, and even the same goes for the Palestinians, right? They're just one bloc. The Palestinians stand for this. They want this. They're going to do it this way, and that's just not true. Maybe we'll start focused on the conflict at hand, Israel and Hamas. Hamas, as a radical Islamist organization, traces their ideological lineage back through the Muslim Brotherhood that was founded in the 1920s in Egypt. But critical to the Muslim Brotherhood's thought was one of the major contributors to that. A lot of people talk about Hassan al-Banna, Sayyid Qutb. These are two mid to late 20th century Islamist thinkers who heavily influenced the Muslim Brotherhood, and so their names usually come up in these discussions. But a big character in formulating the kind of like radical Islamist ideology and the, in a lot of ways, bastardized theology of these groups is actually a man by the name of Haj Amin al-Husseini, who was the Grand Mufti in Jerusalem, the leading kind of like Islamic scholar, cleric, during the days of the British Mandate and in the early days of the State of Israel. And one of the things that becomes really apparent really quickly when you're looking at the charter of Hamas that calls for the destruction of the State of Israel, when you look at the writings of these Muslim Brotherhood scholars and the Grand Mufti back in the late 20th century, is there's a real focus on this idea of leading the Islamic community, and that the competing ideologies, the Arab nationalism of Gamal Abdel Nasser in Egypt, the Ba'athist socialist nationalist ideology that was part of the Syrian and later Iraqi governments. The argument from the Islamic fundamentalists was that these are illegitimate. These are not the pathways the Islamic community needs to follow in order to have success. And the examples they pointed to was the defeat of Arab armies by Israel, notably in the 1967 Six Days War and again in the 1973 Yom Kippur War. So Hamas gets established in the 1980s, steeped in this thinking, steeped in the belief that the broad Islamic community, or the Ummah, is, to use one analogy by Patricia Crone, a scholar on early Islamic history, is that the Islamic community is a caravan in the desert, and it requires, lest they wander off, get lost, and die, you need a faithful leader. And that faithful leader can only be like a faithful, righteous Muslim, basically. That's the idea. That's an old idea of who the caliph is. So this idea of being, so there's two ideas I'm going to tie together here. The first is this idea that someone needs to lead this caravan. And in the 1960s and 70s, as Israel's just dominating the battlefield, the belief is that the leaders who were perpetuating this idea of Arab nationalism and other ideologies, that they were leading the caravan astray. That became the kind of like main argument, the main critique of Arab regimes. And then on top of that, one of the concepts that al-Husseini and others brought forward was that the land of Israel belongs to the Muslims in perpetuity, because they saw it as what's called a waqf. WAQF is the spelling of that, and basically that's kind of like a religious land grant. It's kind of this land they're entitled to by virtue of conquest, kind of thing. And this gets back to this idea of like just competing values, right? If that's your mindset, our mindset, the mindset for Hamas is kind of this mindset of we need to lead the Palestinian cause, the nationalist Palestinian cause, which is secular Muslim Christian, because there are Christian Palestinians who are involved in that, that has been typified by the Palestinian Liberation Organization and the Palestinian Authority over the last several years. The argument is they're defunct, they're not faithful Muslims, they're leading the caravan astray, and and they're willing to negotiate with Israel for shared space, and that violates the fact in Hamas's mind that this is Muslim land and cannot be divided and given up, certainly to non-Muslims. So when we look at the major distinction in terms of how Hamas views this, then there's only one solution. You have to remove the interlopers. You have to kick them out. There's no other alternative. And with the alliance they've formed with Iran and Hezbollah in the last, they've always been connected to them for a long time, but they've really formalized a pretty tight working relationship, I want to say, in the last 10 to 20 years. With that, they've kind of connected up with another revolutionary Islamist state who can sponsor them and support them with a lot of resources that they wouldn't otherwise have access to. And so that kind of gives them a force multiplier, you might say. So long answer. I hope that helps unpack it a little bit. Well, I might have just opened up more.
Yeah, I've got more questions now. We're talking with Tim Milosch of Biola University, adjunct faculty in Biola's political science department. All right, so two questions. I'm going to go to Joe Biden's speech last night addressing the nation. One line that kind of jumped out to me: Hamas doesn't represent the Palestinian people.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
I go, well, weren't they elected? I thought they were elected.
They were elected in 2006, and so it has been about 17 years, and so you can lose a lot of popularity in 17 years. And Joe Biden did a pretty good job of that in just 3. So you can. So was that the last election? That. Has
Hamas just been sticking around since then?
So remember what I just said. Hamas believes they're the ones who rightfully should be leading the cause, but they have a problem. There's another party that's competing with them, the Palestinian Liberation Organization, a constellation of Palestinian parties that used to be led by Yasser Arafat, now led by Mahmoud Abbas. In 2006, there was a Palestinian elections, and the elections were going to be for basically representation and governing the Palestinian Authority, which was going to administer the Palestinian territories, West Bank and Gaza Strip, under auspices of Israeli oversight, certainly security oversight. So the outcome of that election was contested. The Hamas did win a majority. They didn't win an outright majority, if memory serves me correctly. But obviously, the Palestinian Authority, the Palestinian Liberation Organization, did not want Hamas in charge of the Palestinian Authority. The George W. Bush administration didn't want the Hamas in charge of the Palestinian Authority. And certainly Israel didn't want him as either. And so, long story short, a civil war broke out between these opposing factions of the Palestinian population. And because Hamas has its roots in the Muslim Brotherhood, they have historically had a stronghold of support in Gaza because of that shared border with Egypt, and the Muslim Brotherhood originated in Egypt. So Egypt administered the Gaza Strip up until the 1967 war. So for all those reasons, like, Gaza is Hamas central. Whereas the Palestinian Liberation Organization has largely had its base of support in the West Bank. And so you basically ended up with this split Palestinian government, and that's the way it's been, frozen for 17 years. The common enemy is Israel off and on, but the big difference is Hamas hates Israel. Hamas wants to destroy Israel. The Palestinian Liberation Organization has learned to work with Israel, Israel's tried to work with them to form some kind of two-state solution. And so they just, out of the gate, have two very different ways by which they engage with Israel. One is willing to acknowledge a coexistence of sorts with Israel. The other just won't hear of it. And so even among the Palestinians themselves, there's this deep debate over the direction of the cause, you might say, and what shape a future Palestinian community should look like. So bringing that back to Biden.
Tim, we're up against a commercial break here. We'll continue this conversation with Tim Milosch, Biola University adjunct faculty in their political science department. We're going to talk Biden's national address coming up next and what Israel's got to do in Palestine. You're listening to the Frontier Freedom Hour. We'll be right back.